today. How about the UFC giving us another chance to be like Joe Pyfer as he secures a main event against Jack Hermanson? And what about Yair Rodriguez versus Brian Ortega in a rematch in Mexico? And let's not forget about Brandon Moreno, former flyweight champion, stepping in the octagon with Amir Albazi, also in Mexico. And we're also going to talk about Beneil Dariush being horrible on the mic. All of this and more on today's episode of Matter of Fact MMA. What's up? What's happening? Let's go. So what's up, guys? I'm right back with it, right back at you. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of new fights that have been signed, as well as some interesting comments from Beneil Dariush, who might be one of the worst on the mic at 155. So let's start out with at the top, what I talked about. Joe Pyfer has now secured a main event spot. Looks like it's going to be on an Apex card, so, you take that with a grain of salt. Take that as you will. Joe Pyfer stepping in the octagon with Jack the Joker Hermanson. I'm for this fight. Now, it's not the best main event, but honestly, Joe Pyfer's good on the mic. Joe Pyfer seems like he's got a pretty cool personality. The UFC is behind him, so I can't really hate on it too much. Maybe they'll stack the undercard or, the main card a little bit to kind of prop it up, but nevertheless, main event, Joe Pyfer, Jack Hermanson. Jack Hermanson kind of falls in that spot where he's kind of a name. All of the, die-hard, hardcore MMA fans definitely know who Jack Hermanson is. So he kind of holds this spot where, if Joe Pyfer beats him, it really props up Joe Pyfer because he can add that name to the belt. If Jack Hermanson should go out there and beat Joe Pyfer, then it at least kind of says that Jack Hermanson can stay in the spot that he's in. You know what I mean? He's kind of at a point in his career where a few losses and he's dropping out of his spot and possibly out of the rankings. But if he can beat Joe Pyfer, at least it means, we'll keep you, Jack, we'll keep your spot warm for a little while. You know what I'm saying? So, that's what that is. Shout out to both of those men. Interested in seeing that fight. This early on, I'm going to go along with Joe Pyfer, but we'll see as the fight gets closer. I'm not sure when that's signed for. It might be in February, but I'll have to double check that. But nevertheless, shout out to Joe Pyfer. Shout out to Jack Hermanson. We'll see how that goes. Moving on. We got Yair Rodriguez stepping back in the octagon. I believe this is the main event of this card. Stepping in there for a rematch against Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega, back off the shelf, back in these streets. He's single. No more Tracy Cortez. Not sure if that's a loss or a win. Maybe a loss. Nevertheless, Brian Ortega is back, and we're going to see what's going to happen in this fight. Their first fight, at the end of the day, a lot of people might not necessarily, they might look at it as a fluky win for Yair, but Yair was, trying to, he did cinch up the arm and Brian Ortega's shoulder popped. Now, he didn't fully have the submission on, per se, not something to where you're like, oh man, he's about to tap. But, if he came into the fight with previous shoulder damage, Yair Rodriguez elevated that damage. You know what I'm talking about? He escalated that damage. So shout out to Yair Rodriguez. Shout out to Brian Ortega. This should be an interesting fight. We already kind of know where Yair stands in that division, and he stands at the top. He, he lost to possibly maybe the greatest featherweight of all time, being Alexander Volkanovski. So, shout out to Yair. We're going to see if Brian Ortega can still cut the mustard, if he can still hold down his spot in the rankings, and we're going to see how it pans out. This early on, for this fight, I would choose Yair Rodriguez to get the win, but we'll have to see how it goes down. Nevertheless, I believe that's going to be the main event of the card there in Mexico. So that's good star power for that card. Good look. That's awesome. Let's move on. We also have Brandon Moreno, the former flyweight champion of the world, stepping in the octagon to square off against Amir Albazi. This is going to be a really good fight. This is going to be a very interesting fight because normally I would just automatically lean toward Brandon Moreno's going to definitely go out there and get the win. Brandon Moreno's an outstanding fighter, outstanding striker. He's an outstanding, what I would call a pace fighter, meaning Brandon Moreno generally in his fights, he's very calm, he's very collected early on. He could sometimes be looked at as somewhat of a slow starter. So usually his first round, he kind of feels his opponents out. He's usually very slow, very tight guard. You know what I'm saying? As I had my fizz on, he kind of has a very tight guard, doesn't allow a lot of shots to get in, even though he does get hit a lot, which is going to be the second part of my point. But he tends to kind of start slow, but once he kind of, whether it's he took enough shots and it wakes him up, or he's read everything he needs to read from his opponent, he generally at that time begins to set a pace on his fighters, which in my opinion is how he was able to defeat Davison Figueiredo. Once he sets that pace, it's very hard to beat Brandon Moreno. So it's going to be very interesting to see this fight because I believe that Amir Albazi also is an outstanding fighter. I believe he can also set a pace. I would give him the edge in wrestling and in grappling, and not to say that Brandon Moreno is a slouch in wrestling because he's extremely good. I would give Brandon Moreno, of course, the advantage on the feet with them hands. I'm talking about throwing them hands. But the second part of my point is Brandon Moreno has taken a lot of damage. And, I know he's a tough Mexican fighter. He's extremely strong. He's extremely durable. But there has to be a point where that's going to catch up to him. He ate some crazy shots from Davison Figueiredo. He ate some crazy shots from Pantoja. So, I hope that everything, the chin is still solid. I hope he's staying together. But, he has eaten some mega shots in his career, as well as in, maybe his last 3 or 4 fights. It seems like, and it might not be true statistically, but it seems like he's getting cleanly dropped at least once every fight. Now, because he is durable, he tends to come back and still win, even though after getting cleanly dropped. But, the chin can only take so much. So I'm very interested in seeing this fight. Early pick is Brandon Moreno, but I'm not sleeping on Amir Albazi. We'll have to see as this card gets closer. I believe that this is going to be the co-main event of that show. Those are kind of the new fights that were just made. As I spoke about on my last video, which dealt with Ian Gary and his wag. I also talked about your boy, MVP, Michael Venom Page, making his comeback. He's stepping in the octagon with Kevin Holland. But these are some of the other new fights that were just announced. So, UFC is out here trying to make that paper, trying to make that pay. They're out here trying to make these fights. Now, let's move on. This is just going to be super fast. It's just something funny I noticed. Beneil Dariush, who I love as a fighter, seems like he's an outstanding human being in real life. Great guy. Does outstanding charity work, does a lot of great work, with his church, with his organizations that he's a part of, so shout out to him. But this guy, he's almost like he's the Aljamain Sterling on the microphone at 155 pounds. Meaning he's a guy that always says the wrong thing at the wrong time. We have the infamous, after he had just won a major fight at 155 pounds. I believe that was against Mateus Gamrot. And he's in the octagon. The very next fight is going to be for the 155-pound title. And the only thing Beneil Dariush could say was, giving all glory to God. and then started talking about that he would fight 100 more times or 50 more times or 1,000,000 more times. I don't know how many more times. But he was talking about he was going to fight a bunch more until he got his title shot. No, bro, you call immediately for the title shot. Okay? Every time, if you look back at his career, there's been a lot of times where, because he's an exciting fighter. It's not like Beneil Dariush is a boring lay and pray type fighter. You know what I'm saying? He's an exciting fighter, but he just never, and I'm not expecting guys to go out here and be Conor on the mic, but it's like, dude, have an idea in your brain before you go in and fight. Drill that idea of what you're going to say in the post-fight speech or post-fight press conference, especially the post-fight speech. Drill that. Drill that in your brain. Have that ready to go. Even if you get dropped during your fight and your brain is all cloudy, that's why I say you need to drill this. So that way at the end of this fight, you can get on the microphone and you can get paid what you're worth. Because you're not going to get paid what you're worth if you don't have a call out ready or if you don't have something special to say on the microphone. Look at Michael Chandler. After he wins fights, he might not necessarily have a call out, but he takes a few little Ric Flair sayings. He takes a few things from wrestling. He kind of throws it out there. At times it can be cringe, but it's exciting for the fans and the audience, and it's exciting for people watching around the world, which means Dana White notices, and Dana White puts you in the positions that you want to be in career-wise. So Beneil Dariush, I believe he's like maybe around, I don't know, maybe about 35, 36. I could be wrong on that. So it's like, bro, at 155 pounds, you don't have a ton of time left because of the way that division goes to make it to the top and get a title shot. You can keep fighting in that division for a few more years. That's easy. But to get a title shot, that's different. So it's like, bro, you got to go out there and you got to make your call. So I see him in the press conference earlier this week, and he's like, they ask him about fighting, Tsarukyan, and he's like, well, this fight doesn't really do anything for me, but, I'll go in there and I'll take the fight, like the soldier, like the trooper that I am, or whatever he said, right? I'm paraphrasing. Bro, if you beat Tsarukyan, that puts you right back in the saddle. So you got to play that up. You know what I'm saying? Like, you should have already worked that out going into the press conference. You should have came in with some fire. You should have been like, look, I stumbled against Charles Oliveira. I know. But here's the deal. They put me in there with another top-ranked trained killer. And even though I'm ranked higher than him, this is my spot. And I'm going to hold down my ranking. So you can lock me in the cage with Tsarukyan. But when I come out, I'm coming out and I'm looking for the title shot. And even if you're not going to get the title shot anytime soon, you gotta have that vigor. You know what I'm saying? You gotta have that about yourself. Sometimes you gotta nut up. You gotta go in there. You gotta say what you gotta say. And it just kills me when these fighters like Beneil Dariush, who probably, if he never gets a title shot or he doesn't get elevated, he might go out there and lose to Tsarukyan. But nevertheless, I could definitely see him being a guy doing an interview after his career is over, talking about the UFC wouldn't push me, the UFC wouldn't give me my shots. And it's like, bro, you got to go out there and talk. This is the game now. We're not back in the GSP days. It's not back in the day where you just keep climbing up the ladder. You get a title shot. You know what I'm saying? We're not back in those days. You know what I'm saying? We're not back in the John Fitch days. We're not in those days. We're not in those times. This is a new day. This is a new time. You got to be able to say something. You don't have to be perfect on the mic, but you need to already have a name ready, or you need to already have some sort of saying or something crazy that you saw that was intriguing to you that you might be able to spit out to the crowd and get them involved. You have to have something. Even if you just start yelling Dana's name and start yelling, "Give me my shot," which was what Stipe Miocic did. You know what I'm saying? If you have to start yelling, "Give me my shot, I want my shot." What? Stipe was wild for that, all right? Stipe was wild. But whatever you got to do, that's what you got to do. You can't get in there and be like, well, this fight does absolutely nothing for me if I beat Tsarukyan. Bro, do you understand like the type of hype train Sarukian is on? You know what I'm saying? Like, he's only lost to really, really good guys. You know, a guy that you beat being Gamrot. So it's like, man, you got to approach it a little bit better, my guy Beneil Dariush. You know what I'm saying? You got to approach that a little bit better. Nevertheless, we got a big card going down tomorrow. It's got some really good fights on it. You know, shout out to King Bobby Green stepping in there, you know, with Jalen Turner on short notice. I hope my boy Bobby Green can go in there and get the win. Then in the main event, we got Beneil Dariush stepping in there with Sarukian. And honestly, I could see Beneil Dariush taking that one. Look, I'm definitely not sleeping on Sarukian, but I could see Benny going out there and doing his thing. So we're going to see how it goes down tomorrow. Should be some good fights. Once again, I appreciate you guys for joining me for another episode of Matter of Fact MMA. And I check you next time. Peace.